The stage lights were cruel, hot, close, too bright for comfort, too dim to see the audience clearly. Jason sat in the second guest chair. Not the first, the seat reserved for top-billed celebrities. He hadn't minded, until now, because everything felt off. The desk was farther than he remembered. The laughter was too rehearsed, and the host, Mark Langley, was smiling too much. The kind of smile that didn't touch the eyes. Jason had done enough of these shows to know the game. A few jokes, a couple soft questions, a highlight reel, some laughs. Wrap it up, out the door. But this wasn't that. Langley leaned into his monologue like a man with something to prove. And from the first punchline, Jason knew this wasn't going to be just another late-night segment. The jokes started soft. Comments about action stars being a dying breed. Quips about older men doing stunts, about aging heroes with dwindling testosterone. The audience laughed. Jason didn't flinch, but he felt it, that subtle shift. Langley was using him as the punchline, not the guest, and he was just getting started. They ran Jason's promo clip. A short sequence from a gritty indie he'd just finished. No explosions, no fights. Just a quiet scene with Jason delivering a line to a dying character, eyes filled with grief. It was a role he was proud of, different, personal, a step toward something deeper. Langley played the clip. The audience applauded, and as the lights returned, Langley leaned back, crossed his arms, and said the line that lit the fuse. "You know, when I think of Jason Statham, I don't think of crying. I think of punching. Did you get lost on the way to a Nicholas Sparks set?" The crowd laughed hard. Jason sat still, one hand resting calmly on his thigh, but something behind his eyes shifted. Langley grinned at the crowd, soaking in the noise. He wasn't done. He leaned forward again, tapping the note cards in front of him like a drumstick. "I mean, come on, guys, this is Jason the Transporter Statham. What's next? A romantic comedy where he teaches yoga." Another laugh, bigger this time. Jason didn't move, didn't blink. Just let the moment expand. Langley turned to Jason. The grin didn't leave his face. "I'm just teasing you, man. You know I love your work. But seriously, you're not going soft on us, are you?" Jason met his gaze. Calm, still, the kind of look you only learn after being underestimated too many times. Inside, the heat was rising, not in anger, in awareness. This wasn't about teasing anymore. This was about control. Langley wasn't interviewing, he was performing. And Jason had become the prop. The segment moved on. A rapid-fire round of cliché questions, boxers or briefs, craziest fan encounter. What's your real-life fight record? Jason answered them, short, direct, but polite. He dealt with worse. But what came next was different. Langley pulled out a folder, something unplanned. Jason knew the moment the crowd's energy shifted again. Langley held up an old press photo, Jason in his early 20s. Shaved head. Holding pads in a back alley gym. Thin, tired, far from famous. "Look at this guy," Langley laughed. Straight out of a Guy Ritchie casting reject pile. The audience laughed louder than before, too loud, too long. Jason's jaw flexed once, only once. Langley leaned in. "So what was the plan back then, huh? Break into Hollywood through a side door or just punch your way in?" Jason breathed through his nose, spoke finally, low, even. "That was my father's gym, the day before it closed down." Langley froze for a half-second, then pivoted with another joke. But the room, it wasn't laughing the same way now. Jason didn't want revenge. He didn't need to win the audience back. But he understood something most people forgot. When someone is drowning in their own ego, the worst thing you can do is save them. They cut to commercial. Jason sat still, quiet, focused. Langley leaned over, still smiling, off mic now. "You all right? Don't want to scare the guests off, mate." Jason just looked at him, didn't nod, didn't smirk, just looked. Langley's smile faltered just for a breath, before the floor manager called time and everyone reset. Backstage, a producer pulled Jason aside. She was young, nervous, carrying a clipboard and an apology in her eyes. "He's just trying to go viral," she whispered. "It's nothing personal." Jason tilted his head, not in agreement, just in acknowledgement, then walked away. Outside, the city roared. Late-night traffic. Neon signs, sirens in the distance. Jason stood on the curb, no driver yet, just space to think. And as he stood there, alone beneath a buzzing street lamp, one line repeated in his mind. He thinks this is over. It wasn't rage. It wasn't pride. It was precision. Jason wasn't going to shout. He wasn't going to post a rebuttal or blast a video to social media. That wasn't his language. Instead, he made a call to someone the world had forgotten. Have you ever watched someone get humiliated, not by accident but by design? Tell us in the comments. Because mockery isn't comedy when it targets a person's past, and Jason wasn't about to let this one slide. That night, Jason sent 3 texts, one to his publicist, one to a trainer in East London, and one to someone who hadn't been in the spotlight in 15 years, a man whose name still made Langley nervous if it ever came up. What Jason was planning wasn't revenge, it was revelation. Because if the host wanted a performance, he was about to get one. But not on his stage. Langley's team thought they had won. The clip hit YouTube within hours, titled, "Jason Statham Gets Roasted on Live TV, Can't Handle the Heat." Within 24 hours, it passed 800,000 views. Cut up sound bites. Zoom-ins of Jason sitting silently. Overlaid laugh tracks for clips that didn't even get real laughs in the studio. The internet ate it up. Comments poured in. Statham's lost it. Dude got soft. He used to be scary, now he just sulks. Langley reposted it on his official page. Added a caption that read, "All in good fun," smirking face. But Jason didn't respond, not on Instagram, not in interviews, not through agents, because the storm was still forming, and Jason had already chosen where he'd let it break. It started with a call to Garrick Vane, an old name, a shadow to most of the current generation, but to the ones who knew, a ghost with a reputation. He wasn't an actor, wasn't a trainer. He was what Jason used to be before Hollywood, a calibrator, the kind of man who tuned egos down like faulty engines. They met in an abandoned rehearsal studio in Camden. No press, no lights, just the echo of fists slapping pads and the sound of breath drawn with control. Jason stepped in. No greeting, just motion. He wrapped his hands, rolled his shoulders, and nodded once. Garrick tossed him the mitts. "You want to hit back," he said. Jason shook his head. "I want to remind." For the next 5 days, Jason trained, not to fight, to center. To pull everything back to where it started. Before the films, before the money, before the world expected him to grin through mockery and play the game. On the 6th day, the call came. Not from Langley. From Jonathan Mendez, producer of Face Off, a web series known for pairing guests in unscripted, high-stakes discussions. Mendez had seen the clip, had seen the reaction, and knew 2 things. Jason wasn't angry, he was waiting. Langley was arrogant enough to walk into it. So he pitched the idea, a rematch. No monologue, no crowd, just 2 chairs, 2 cameras, and 1 conversation. You get to respond your way. Jason said only 2 words: "Send the time." Langley's camp was harder to convince. His team spun it like a playful continuation, a way to milk the virality while pretending to offer a platform for balance. Langley didn't see the trap. He thought it would be safe. One-on-one, no audience, no studio, perfect. He didn't realize Jason had just removed every single advantage he had. The shoot was quiet. A single black box studio, 2 chairs, 1 long table between them. Jason arrived early. He sat in silence for 20 minutes before Langley even showed. No mic check, no makeup. Just a man sitting with posture that didn't need explanation. Langley walked in, all charm. Buttoned suit, shiny shoes, jokes ready. Jason didn't stand, didn't smile, just looked up, calm as ever. The cameras rolled. The host greeted the audience, not realizing there wasn't one. Then he looked at Jason and tried the first jab. "Didn't expect to see you in a chair again so soon. Thought maybe you'd gone into hiding after our last show." Jason didn't blink, let the moment breathe, then leaned forward, rested both forearms on the table. "You humiliated me on your show." Langley smirked. "Come on. It was just a few jokes." Jason cut him off, not with volume but with intention. "You used my past, my grief, for a punchline. You thought silence meant you'd won." Langley shifted in his seat. The air cracked. Jason continued. "You called up a photo of me from a gym that no longer exists. My father died 6 months after that picture. That gym was all he had." Langley's eyes darted. Jason didn't flinch. "You laughed. They laughed. You invited people to laugh at a life you didn't earn the right to mock." Langley opened his mouth, but Jason kept going, calm, even bulletproof. "That moment, that photo, was the reason I started training. It was where I learned how to listen, to hold back, to absorb people's pain without letting it infect mine." He pointed slightly, not accusing, just illustrating. "You've made a career off of other people's discomfort, off of pretending shame is comedy. But comedy that only punches down is cowardice." The silence in the room was deeper than anything Langley had faced in his career. There was no audience to laugh with him. No sidekick to tag in, no applause sign to save him, only one man, sitting across from him, refusing to let him escape the mirror he now held. Langley attempted to pivot. "Well, I mean, you've done action films. You know about taking hits, right?" Jason nodded slowly. "Yes. But in those, the fight is fair." Another pause. This wasn't. Then Jason did something no one expected. He pulled out a small photo. The same photo Langley had mocked. He placed it on the table between them. It wasn't for sympathy. It was a statement, a declaration, a line in the sand. Langley looked down at it, and for the first time, he had nothing. Have you ever seen someone who thought they were untouchable finally be held accountable? Tell us your story in the comments, because Jason didn't fight with fists, he fought with truth. And Langley, he'd just been stripped of the only weapon he ever really had, the illusion of control. The episode aired 3 days later. It wasn't titled for clicks. It was titled, "Silence Doesn't Mean Surrender." It opened with Jason placing the photo on the table. No sound, no graphics, just that. The internet didn't erupt, it froze. For the first time in months, people didn't meme. They didn't cut sound bites. They watched every minute, and when it ended, they stood still. Because Jason hadn't reclaimed his dignity. He'd never lost it. For 12 hours, the industry said nothing. The Face-Off episode aired without promo. No banners, no trailers, no teasers clipped for TikTok. But by the time the sun rose, everything had changed. The episode was only 32 minutes long. No music, no edits, no applause track, just Jason's voice, just the photo. Just the weight of truth in an echo chamber that wasn't ready for it. It hit different, not because it was dramatic, but because no one defended themselves. Langley sat there, shrinking by the second, while Jason dismantled the entire ecosystem of mockery the industry had built around men like him. By 8 a.m., the video passed 1 million views, but the comments weren't the usual viral fodder. They were quiet, long. Stories spilled open from people who had once been laughed at, on air, in meetings, in school gyms, at kitchen tables. This is what it looks like when someone finally says enough. He just gave voice to everyone who had to sit there and take it. Jason didn't fight back. He stood still and let the truth hit. Langley didn't lose the moment. He exposed what was always there. The clip of Jason placing the photo on the table became an instant symbol, not a meme, a moment, one that couldn't be joked away. And in PR offices across the city, the fallout began. Langley's management team went into overdrive. They issued a statement calling the Face-Off interview a moment of artistic vulnerability and praising Jason for bringing a deeper conversation to light. It fooled no one. Comment sections exploded. "Now you're spiritual. Too late for grace. You had your shot and you laughed. The man sat across from you and handed you his father's memory. You cracked a joke." And just like that, Langley's empire began to shrink. 3 major sponsors paused contracts. A studio put a development deal on hold. One guest canceled an upcoming segment. But the most telling sign came from inside. The writers refused to write new jokes. Meanwhile, Jason said nothing. He didn't retweet the clip, didn't thank the fans, didn't ride the wave. He went back to training, back to small gyms, back to broken punching bags and scuffed mats. He wasn't chasing applause, because this had never been about revenge. It was about respect. And then the call came from a studio executive who hadn't reached out in years, an older woman, quiet. Known for producing 2 of Jason's early indie films before he became a brand, she left a voicemail. "That thing you did, on Face-Off, that was your best work. No director, no script, just presence. We've got a story here. Not a role, not a blockbuster, a story. And I think it's time you told it." Jason didn't respond right away. He let it sit, not because he was undecided, because he was remembering what it meant to stand for something without turning it into content, to let the world catch up without running toward the noise, to keep your voice when others weaponized theirs. Across town, Langley tried to recover. He booked smaller interviews, leaned into self-deprecating humor, tried to frame the incident as a powerful experience that helped him grow. But no one bought it. Because you can't unhear truth spoken without anger. You can't forget a man who didn't raise his voice and still silenced a room. One clip surfaced later that week, unplanned, unscheduled. A young intern who had worked backstage the night Jason appeared on Langley's show posted a 15-second video. No faces, just audio. Jason, right before stepping onto the main set, asking one simple question. Is there anything off limits? The producer responded, laughing. Not for Langley. Jason replied, calm, quiet. That's unfortunate. It went viral in hours, because in 6 words he had foreshadowed everything. Have you ever watched someone try to laugh their way out of accountability, only to be stopped by someone who didn't need to shout, tell your story in the comments? Because when the moment comes, silence doesn't mean fear, it means calculation. The real twist came 1 week later. Langley was invited to speak at a media summit, the kind of event where hosts usually pat each other on the back and trade polished lessons on content evolution. The room was full. Langley walked on stage. No script, no crew, just him. He stood at the mic for nearly 30 seconds before speaking. When he did, his voice cracked. I made someone's pain a joke, and they gave me grace I didn't deserve. The room was still. Langley continued. Jason Statham didn't cancel me. He taught me by doing nothing. And it was the most devastating lesson of my career. The clip reached Jason within the hour. He didn't respond, didn't repost, didn't even watch the full thing, because he wasn't looking for remorse. He was looking for repair, and that wasn't going to happen on a stage. That same afternoon, Jason sent a text to one person, the producer of Face Off. I want one more episode, not with Langley, with the audience. The producer replied with a single question, what's the angle? Jason responded, there isn't one. The studio was empty when Jason arrived. No co-host, no desk, no jokes, just rows of chairs, everyone occupied by someone who had once sat in an audience, laughed at a guest, and then walked out unchanged. That was the invitation. Not a crowd, a mirror. That's how the email put it. Each person had watched the Langley interview live. Each had cheered, clapped, smiled when Jason was put down. But now they were back, not as spectators, as participants. Jason entered from stage left. No applause. He didn't wear a suit. Just the same black shirt, same boots, same stillness. He walked to the center. No chair. No podium, just space. He turned slowly, looked at the faces in front of him. Some smiled nervously, some looked down. Others held eye contact, like they'd been waiting for this chance to make it right. Jason didn't perform, he spoke. You were there. His voice was low, calm, felt like gravel smoothed over time. You laughed, and I don't blame you for that. A few people looked away. Because laughing is easy when it's happening to someone else. He paced slowly, not dramatic, measured. I've done it. Watched someone fall apart on live TV and thought, at least it's not me. He stopped at the center of the room again. But then it was. A woman in the second row swallowed hard. Jason continued. I didn't come here to shame you. That's what the other guy did. That's what people like him do. He turned. I came here because I want to ask a question most people never do. Why did you laugh? The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest, the kind that burns. Jason didn't fill it. He just stood there, waited. Until finally a man in the fourth row raised his hand, late 20s, hoodie, nervous voice, because it was expected. The studio told us when to laugh. We were cued. Jason nodded, not letting him off the hook, just letting him in. Another voice. A woman this time. Older. I laughed because I didn't think you cared. You looked calm. I thought maybe it didn't hurt. Jason stepped closer. That's the lie I was raised to live. Look calm, say nothing, and no one can break you. But silence isn't immunity. It's just quiet pain. A third voice spoke. I laughed because I didn't know your story. I thought it was just part of the show. Jason turned slowly, then placed a photo down on a nearby table, the same one from Langley's show. The father, the gym, the exhaustion in his younger face. Jason didn't explain it again. He just let it be seen. This is what was mocked, not a movie, not a role, a memory, a life. A man who raised me without ever asking for applause. He looked around. And that's what I want from you now. Not applause, awareness. Have you ever been in the room when someone was mocked and stayed silent? Tell your story in the comments. Because shame doesn't just come from the one holding the mic. It comes from the people who clap on cue. Jason sat then, not center stage, just to the side. He didn't need to dominate the space. He'd already changed it. The audience began to speak freely now, not performatively, not dramatically, but truthfully. One woman stood. She had tears in her voice before she said a word. I've been laughed at before, in a courtroom, on camera. They called me too emotional to testify. I stayed quiet for years. Watching what happened to you reminded me why I stopped speaking. Jason met her eyes, didn't interrupt, let her finish. She did, and then said, "But now I want to try again." Another man raised his hand. "My father left because he couldn't handle being mocked for being poor. I used to laugh at others to make sure it wouldn't be me next." Jason nodded. "We all learned that somewhere. How to laugh just loud enough to not be the target." For an hour, stories came out about pain, about pasts, about people who learned that cruelty was currency and silence was armor. Jason didn't teach, he witnessed. Then, near the end, someone asked, "Why come back? Why face us?" Jason thought a moment, then stood again. "Because too many of us only confront the voice on stage." He looked around, and never ask why the audience stayed quiet. He turned once more to the photo, lifted it gently, held it up. "This man taught me to stand still while the world lost its mind. To stay grounded when others needed someone to attack." He never had a platform, never had a mic, but he had presence, and that was enough. Jason faced the crowd one final time. If you've ever stayed silent when someone was humiliated, that moment doesn't define you. But what you do next, that does. The lights dimmed slowly, no music, no outrow, no applause, just stillness. The kind that doesn't ask for attention, the kind that changes people. Jason didn't speak publicly for the next 2 months, no follow-up interviews, no podcast guest spots, no press junkets. He didn't need to. The clip from the studio of him standing in front of the audience confronting their silence had done what years of branding never could. It stripped away the fiction of fame and replaced it with something far rarer, resonance. But while the world talked, Jason acted quietly, deliberately. He visited 4 schools not in front of cameras. He met with young men in quiet classrooms and sat across from them as they admitted things their fathers never taught them how to say. "I laughed at a kid once 'cause he cried at training. I thought that made me stronger. I hit a wall last year. Not the physical kind, the one in your chest. Sometimes I don't know the difference between strength and fear anymore." Jason didn't lecture. He listened. Because what Langley had revealed on national television wasn't about Jason. It was about what happens when mockery is normalized and how many men mistake humiliation for toughness. The movement wasn't branded, it had no hashtag, but people called it the silence that spoke. Clips surfaced of gym coaches changing their tone. Talk shows adjusted their scripts. One even dropped a recurring segment called The Hot Seat, where guests were routinely roasted for ratings. And when asked why, the producer said, "We watched Jason sit in that chair and realized we've built a business around hurting people." Meanwhile, Langley stayed quiet, not because he was canceled, but because he was finally listening. He stopped uploading daily content, stopped doing late-night circuits, and started, for the first time, visiting the kinds of places he used to mock on air: hospice centers, addiction recovery groups, youth shelters. He never announced it. Someone else leaked a photo of him once. No smile, no crew, just sitting in a folding chair beside a man missing 3 teeth, listening like his life depended on it. Jason saw the photo, didn't comment, just nodded to himself, because real change doesn't post itself. Then came the moment no one expected, the one thing Jason hadn't done yet. He walked back onto a talk show stage, but it wasn't Langley's. It wasn't even his own invitation. It was for a show no one outside a certain community had ever heard of: Centerline. A small, nonprofit broadcast focused on emotional recovery in men, real conversations, no cue cards. Jason sat across from a counselor who used to be a prison therapist. The audience was a circle of 10, half of them ex-cons, half of them former soldiers. And Jason opened with this: "I used to think I was invincible, because I could take hits, fall off buildings, survive anything. But turns out, the thing that hurt most was being laughed at when I was just trying to be honest." The room went still. A man with burned scars across his arms, silent up to that point, spoke up. "You showed us how to stand still. When every instinct says hit back, shout louder, walk off. You stayed." Jason nodded. "Because when the world mocks you, staying is the strongest thing you can do." The clip from that interview didn't go viral, it wasn't supposed to, but it was played in community centers, in military barracks, in therapy groups across the UK and beyond. People didn't react with applause, they reacted with stillness, because Jason had turned mockery into momentum, and momentum into meaning. 1 year after the original Langley interview aired, Face Off invited Jason back, not for closure, for legacy. They aired a short documentary titled, When Silence Wins. It featured no narrator, just moments, the Langley clip, the studio mirror audience, the school visits, and finally Jason placing that photo again in the center of the screen. But this time with one change. Next to it sat a second photo, a young man smiling, wearing a hoodie, standing outside a youth center with Jason beside him. He was the same audience member who had stood up and said, "I laughed, because I didn't think you cared." Now, he worked at the Forge, Jason's training space, helping others who'd learned to stay silent out of fear. Have you ever witnessed something that changed how you spoke to people forever? Tell us in the comments, because this wasn't just about Jason being mocked. It was about what happened after he didn't flinch. The final image shown in the documentary wasn't Jason walking off set. It wasn't a fight, it wasn't revenge. It was Jason, sitting in the back row of a self-defense class, watching others train, not teaching, not correcting, just watching. Because the truest strength doesn't seek the spotlight, it makes space for others to rise. Jason never reclaimed his image. He didn't need to, because what Langley thought was humiliation was actually the doorway, and Jason walked through it without rage, without noise, just truth, and the world listened.